I'm Louis, 34, a senior software engineer who's been silently paying my parents' bills for the past 7 years. Despite my success, I was always second place to my golden child brother Marcus. So imagine my shock when I accidentally discovered they had completely cut me out of their will, giving everything to him. After all those years of financial support, the betrayal felt like a knife to my chest. That day, I made a decision that would change everything for all of us. Before I dive into this story, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from, hit that like button, and subscribe to catch more real-life family drama stories that might just help you navigate your own challenging relationships. Growing up in suburban Boston wasn't terrible, but it wasn't exactly idyllic either. We were a middle-class family with the usual financial struggles that come with raising 2 boys. My father Richard worked as an accountant for a local firm, bringing home a steady but modest paycheck. My mother Patricia taught 3rd grade at the elementary school just 2 blocks from our house. They were hard-working people, and I can't fault them for that. Marcus came into the world 4 years after me, and it was like watching the sun rise in my parents' eyes. From day one, he was special. While I was the awkward, bookish kid with thick glasses and an obsession with computers, Marcus was everything parents dream about. Athletic, charming, and effortlessly popular. He had this natural charisma that drew people to him, including our parents. The favoritism wasn't blatant at first. It was subtle, showing up in small moments that accumulated over time like tiny paper cuts to my self-esteem. When I made honor roll, I'd get a pat on the back and a good job. When Marcus got a C+ after nearly failing it, warranted a celebration dinner because he had tried so hard. For my 10th birthday, I received a set of encyclopedias that my parents found at a garage sale. For Marcus's 10th birthday, he got a brand new bike and a party at the local pizza arcade with 20 of his friends. When I asked why my celebration had been just cake at home with my grandparents, Mom simply said, "Marcus needs more social interaction than you do, Louis. You're happy with your books." And she wasn't wrong. I did love learning. School became my sanctuary. While Marcus was out winning Little League games with Dad cheering from the bleachers, I was winning math competitions with only my math teacher there to witness it. I learned early that if I wanted something, I needed to earn it myself. By 16, I was working weekends at the local computer repair shop, saving every dollar I could. My parents seemed proud of my initiative, but there was always an undercurrent of Louis is fine on his own that justified their disproportionate attention to Marcus. When college application time came around, I applied for every scholarship possible. I spent countless nights perfecting essays while maintaining my job and straight A's. The result was a nearly full ride to a prestigious university for computer science with just a small gap I could cover with my savings and part-time work. Marcus, meanwhile, barely maintained a C average in high school, too busy being the soccer team captain and dating the most popular girls. When he received only partial scholarships to state schools, my parents immediately stepped up. "We'll help you, of course," they assured him. "Your talents are on the field, not in the classroom. That's nothing to be ashamed of." They never offered to help with my remaining costs. The assumption was that I had it handled, and I did because I'd learned that was my role in the family. The responsible one, the independent one, the one who didn't need help. College was transformative for me. I thrived in the computer science program, securing prestigious internships each summer. I graduated with minimal debt, thanks to my scholarships and consistent work at the university's IT department. I was hired directly from my final internship into a promising position at a tech startup in Boston. Marcus, however, dropped out of college during his 2nd year. It just wasn't the right environment for his creative spirit, my mother explained during one of our infrequent phone calls. 6 months later, my parents paid for him to enroll at a different college. He dropped out of that one too after 3 semesters. Yet somehow this was never viewed as failure. It was always framed as Marcus finding his path or refusing to be constrained by conventional systems. Meanwhile, my conventional success in a growing tech company was expected almost mundane in their eyes. Despite the clear imbalance, I maintained a relationship with my parents. Weekly calls, visits on major holidays, birthday gifts that were more thoughtful than what I typically received in return. I told myself that family was family, and holding grudges wouldn't change anything. Besides, I was doing well. Really well, actually. And there was a small part of me that still hoped my achievements might someday earn the same enthusiasm they showed for Marcus's simple participation in life. That hope, as I would learn over the following years, was as naive as believing a houseplant might suddenly start speaking if you just watered it enough. The years after college were a period of rapid growth for my career. The tech startup where I began had innovative ideas but shaky execution. I quickly became valuable by solving problems no one else could tackle. 3 promotions in 4 years had me leading a development team by the age of 26. When a major tech company in Seattle headhunted me for a senior position with nearly double my salary, I took the leap. The move across the country was both physically and symbolically significant. I was building my own life, thousands of miles from the family dynamics that had shaped my early years. Seattle suited me. I rented a modern apartment downtown with views of Puget Sound, but I lived well below my means. My parents had never taught me about investing or financial planning. Those conversations were considered too boring for family dinners, so I educated myself. I read books, took courses, consulted with financial advisors, and implemented a disciplined investment strategy. By 30, I had purchased a 3-bedroom house in a desirable neighborhood, built a diversified investment portfolio, and was on track for early retirement if I chose that path. My life wasn't flashy, but it was secure and steadily advancing toward my goals. Meanwhile, back in Boston, Marcus had established a pattern that would continue for years. He would get enthusiastic about a job work there for 6 to 8 months, then quit because his talents weren't being recognized or there was no room for advancement. He briefly sold real estate, worked at a friend's marketing agency, tried being a personal trainer, and even spent a summer as a bartender on Cape Cod. Between these jobs were periods of unemployment where he lived with our parents rent-free. When he did have income, he spent it on designer clothes, weekend trips, and leasing luxury cars he couldn't afford. My parents enabled this behavior, always providing a safety net that prevented Marcus from experiencing the natural consequences of his choices. "Your brother is a free spirit," Mom would say during our phone calls. "Not everyone is meant to follow the conventional path like you did, Lewis." Dad was more direct. "Marcus has vision. He just hasn't found the right opportunity to showcase his talents." Despite the distance, I maintained my relationship with them. Every Christmas, I flew back to Boston, staying in a hotel rather than my old bedroom, which had been converted into a home gym that Marcus rarely used. Each visit followed the same pattern. Mom would fuss over how thin I looked. I wasn't. Dad would briefly inquire about my job before changing the subject, and Marcus, if he showed up, would dominate conversations with tales of his latest venture or relationship drama. Everything changed when Dad had his first health scare at 62. He experienced severe chest pain and was diagnosed with coronary artery disease, requiring medication and lifestyle changes. The doctor bills started piling up. That's when I learned my parents had refinanced their house multiple times, had minimal retirement savings, and were carrying significant credit card debt. Without being asked, I stepped in. I paid off the largest medical bills immediately and set up a system to cover their monthly mortgage. When Dad had to reduce his work hours, I increased my support to cover utilities as well. "It's temporary," Dad insisted, his pride clearly wounded. "Just until I'm back on my feet." But it wasn't temporary. As their financial situation became clearer to me, I realized they had made decades of poor financial decisions, often to support Marcus's various needs and ventures. They had remortgaged their home twice, once to cover Marcus's first college attempt, and again to bail him out when he accrued massive credit card debt in his late 20s. Within a year, I was paying their mortgage, utilities, property taxes, and supplementing their grocery budget. It amounted to nearly $4,000 monthly, a significant sum even with my substantial income. Marcus knew about this arrangement, but contributed nothing beyond occasional emotional support during family crises. The dynamic was frustrating but familiar. I was the responsible son handling practical matters, while Marcus remained the emotional favorite. When my parents spoke about me to relatives or friends, it was always about my financial success. When they spoke about Marcus, they shared his personality, his dreams, his struggles, his heart. I was a wallet. He was a person. Yet I continued supporting them, partly out of duty, partly out of lingering hope for approval, and partly because I knew they genuinely needed the help. I told myself that family takes care of family, even when it's unbalanced, even when it hurts. I had no idea how unbalanced it truly was, until the day I discovered the will. Everything escalated when Dad suffered a massive heart attack at 65. I was in the middle of a crucial product launch meeting when Mom's call came through. Seeing her name on my screen during work hours was unusual enough that I excused myself immediately. "Louis, it's your father," she sobbed into the phone. "The ambulance just took him. It looks bad." I didn't hesitate. Within an hour, I had booked a flight, informed my team I'd be taking emergency leave, and was throwing essentials into a suitcase. The entire cross-country flight, my mind raced between worst-case scenarios and practical concerns. Did they have adequate health insurance? Was Dad's life insurance policy still active? Who would handle things if he didn't? Make it. When I arrived at the hospital, Mom was alone in the waiting room, looking suddenly much older than her 63 years. Dad was in surgery, an emergency triple bypass. I asked about Marcus. "I called him right after you," she said. "He's very upset. He'll be here as soon as he can." Marcus arrived 5 hours later, by which time Dad was out of surgery and in recovery. He burst into the room dramatically, tears streaming down his face, making the moment about his emotional reaction rather than Dad's condition. Mom immediately comforted him while I spoke with the doctors about post-operative care and recovery expectations. The following days established a pattern. I handled insurance paperwork, coordinated with doctors, arranged for home care equipment, and researched cardiac rehabilitation programs. Marcus provided emotional support, bringing Mom homemade soup and sitting by Dad's bedside telling jokes and stories that lifted his spirits. Both roles were necessary, but only one received constant appreciation. "Your brother has been our rock through this," Mom told me, apparently forgetting who had flown 3,000 miles on a moment's notice and was handling every practical aspect of the crisis. As Dad recovered, I extended my leave from work. During this time, I gained access to their financial records to deal with medical bills and was horrified by what I found. Their mortgage had a balloon payment coming due. They had 3 credit cards near their limits. Dad's retirement account had been partially liquidated recently, with penalty, 2,000, for reasons neither of them would clearly explain. I arranged a meeting with a financial advisor friend who specialized in retirement planning. The picture he painted was bleak. They had nowhere near enough saved for retirement, especially considering Dad would need to fully retire given his health condition. Their fixed income from Social Security and Dad's modest pension would cover less than 60% of their monthly expenses. "Have you been helping them financially already?" James, the advisor, asked. When I explained the extent of my support, he frowned. "That's not sustainable long-term, Louis. Not for them, and not for you." But what was the alternative? Let them lose their home. Watch them struggle to afford Dad's medications. After careful consideration, I made a decision that seemed right at the time. I would take over their major expenses permanently. I set up automatic payments for their mortgage, utilities, and property taxes. I established a monthly transfer to their checking account for medications and daily expenses. All told, my financial commitment increased to $4,000 monthly. "This is temporary," I assured them, though I knew it likely wasn't. "Just until you get back on your feet." Dad looked relieved but embarrassed. Mom cried and hugged me. "You've always been so practical, Louis. Such a good provider. Not such a good son, or we're so proud of you. Just an acknowledgement of my function, my utility." I extended my stay for 3 weeks to get everything organized before returning to Seattle. The day before my departure, Marcus finally showed up again, having been mostly absent since his initial emotional hospital visit. He brought takeout dinner and entertained everyone with stories about a potential business opportunity he was exploring. "It could be big," he said, eyes alight with excitement. "Really big." Mom and Dad were captivated, asking questions, offering suggestions, fully engaged. No one mentioned my impending departure or the financial arrangements I'd made to secure their future. That night in my hotel room, I felt the full emotional toll of the situation. I was shouldering enormous responsibility with minimal appreciation. I was treated as a financial resource rather than a son deserving of the same emotional investment they gave Marcus. Yet I continued telling myself this was simply my role in the family. I flew back to Seattle the next day, immediately diving back into work to catch up on everything I'd missed. Life resumed its pattern, but with a significant portion of my income now permanently directed toward my parents' survival. The resentment grew quietly like mold in a dark corner, unseen but steadily spreading. I didn't acknowledge it even to myself. I just did what needed to be done month after month because that's who I had always been in our family. The responsible one, the provider, the human ATM. Until Marcus's next brilliant idea changed everything. About 8 months after Dad's heart attack, during our weekly phone call, Mom mentioned that Marcus was really onto something this time. Her voice had that familiar, excited quality it always took on when discussing my brother's latest ventures. He's starting a luxury boat touring company, she gushed. Taking people around the harbor, sunset cruises, private events. He says it's an untapped market in our area. I made appropriate interested noises, while mentally calculating the startup costs for such a business. Boats, insurance, licensing, marketing, staff, the numbers were substantial. He's got it all figured out, Dad chimed in from the extension. Already has potential clients lined up. Corporate events mostly. That sounds promising, I said cautiously. Has he secured funding? There was a brief pause before Mom answered. Well, he's exploring options. You know how banks can be so rigid about lending to new businesses. The alarm bells started ringing immediately. I knew what was coming next. Sure enough, 2 weeks later, Marcus himself called me, a rare occurrence that only happened when he wanted something. Louis, how's my big brother, the tech genius? His voice was overly enthusiastic, the charm turned up to maximum level. We exchanged brief pleasantries before he got to the point. So Mom and Dad probably told you about my new business venture. It's going to be incredible, man. I've done all the research. The ROI in the first year alone could be 50% or more. Marcus had a talent for picking up business terminology and deploying it convincingly without necessarily understanding the underlying concepts. That's an aggressive projection for a new business, I replied carefully. That's because most people think small. I've got connections, Louis. People who want to book already. I just need the startup capital. He paused for effect. Mom and Dad are considering helping me out. Helping how I asked, though I already knew. They've got equity in the house. They could take out another mortgage. It would be an investment, not a gift. I'd pay them back with interest. Just as he'd never paid back the previous loans. Just as he'd never repaid them for the 2 college attempts they'd funded. Just as he'd never contributed to their expenses despite living with them rent-free for significant portions of his adult life. Marcus, they can't afford another mortgage. Dad's still recovering, they're on a fixed income and the house payment is already tight. I didn't mention that I was the one making that payment. That's the beauty of it, Louis. Once the business takes off, I'd pay off their entire mortgage. They could retire completely worry-free. It's a win-win. I spent the next hour trying to reason with him, explaining the risks, the reality of business failure rates, and our parents' precarious financial position. He dismissed every concern with the unshakable confidence of someone who had never faced real consequences for failure. The conversation ended with him annoyed, and me worried enough to book a flight to Boston for the following weekend. I needed to see exactly what was happening. The tension was palpable, the moment I walked into my parents' house for an impromptu family dinner. Marcus was there uncharacteristically dressed in business casual attire instead of his usual trendy clothes. He had printouts of harbor maps, boat specifications, and a crudely formatted business plan. Mom had prepared all my childhood favorites, pot roast mashed potatoes, green bean casserole, clearly an attempt to soften whatever confrontation she anticipated. Through appetizers and main course, the conversation remained superficial. Weather, sports, local gossip. No one mentioned boats or mortgages or investments. But when Mom served coffee and pie, Marcus cleared his throat. I wanted everyone together to discuss the business opportunity he announced. Louis, I know you have concerns, but I've worked out all the details. He launched into a presentation that was equal parts fantasy and misunderstood business concepts. The revenue projections were wildly optimistic. The expense estimates were suspiciously low. The marketing plan consisted mainly of word of mouth and social media. When he finished, my parents were beaming with pride. "We've discussed it," Dad said, "and we're going to help Marcus get this off the ground. It's an investment in his future." "And our retirement," Mom added quickly, perhaps sensing my objection forming. "Marcus will be able to take care of us once this takes off." I took a deep breath. "How much are you planning to invest?" Dad looked uncomfortable. "We can take out $150,000 from the house. The equity is there." $150,000. More than 3 years of the mortgage payments I'd been making. Money they didn't have secured against the house I was paying for. "That's not an investment, that's gambling with your financial security," I said, trying to keep my voice level. "What happens if the business fails?" "Why do you always assume I'll fail?" Marcus snapped. "Because historically that's what happens," I responded, harsher than I intended. "Name one venture you've started that's still operating." Marcus's face flushed. "This is different. I've matured. I've done the research." "Your research is superficial at best. Have you calculated insurance costs, licensing staff salaries, boat maintenance, fuel costs, docking fees?" I pointed to his business plan. "None of that is adequately addressed here. Not everyone approaches things with spreadsheets and worst-case scenarios," Lewis' mom interjected. "Sometimes you need faith in people." "This isn't about faith. It's about math." I turned to Dad. "You're an accountant. You know these numbers don't add up." Dad looked uncomfortable. "Sometimes you have to take risks in business. Risks based on solid planning, not wishful thinking," I countered. The conversation deteriorated from there. Marcus accused me of always undermining him. Mom said I was being unnecessarily negative. Dad sat silently, looking torn. Finally, after Marcus dramatically claimed I was trying to sabotage his one chance at success, Mom delivered the line that made me snap. "Lewis, you just don't understand family loyalty. Not everyone can be perfect like you with your fancy job and your perfect life. Some of us need support to succeed." I stood up so abruptly my chair nearly toppled. "Family loyalty. I've been paying your mortgage for years. I cover your utilities, your property taxes, most of your living expenses. Where's the loyalty to me in this decision?" The room went silent. We never openly discussed my financial support. It was the elephant in the room, acknowledged in private thanks, but never in family conversations. "That's different," Mom finally said. "You can afford it. So because I worked hard and made good choices, I'm obligated to fund everyone else's bad ones." I grabbed my coat. "I need some air." I walked out without another word, spending the night in my hotel instead of the guest room. The next morning I flew back to Seattle a day early, too angry to attempt further discussion. But the situation nagged at me. Despite my anger, I genuinely didn't want my parents to make a catastrophic financial mistake. So I spent the next week researching the luxury boat tour market in Boston Harbor, creating a detailed analysis of startup costs, operational expenses, competitive landscape, and realistic revenue projections. The conclusion was clear: the business had less than a 20% chance of survival beyond the first year, even with perfect execution. The initial investment required was closer to $250,000, not $150,000. The seasonal nature of the business in Boston's climate meant cash flow would be extremely problematic. I compiled everything into a comprehensive report and emailed it to my parents with a gentle but firm cover note, explaining my concerns came from love, not a desire to undermine Marcus. Dad replied with a short message: "We appreciate your thoroughness, but sometimes numbers don't tell the whole story." Mom didn't respond at all. Marcus sent a text that simply read, "Always the know-it-all. This is why people find you insufferable." I decided to step back. I'd done what I could. They were adults making their own decisions, however foolish. I continued paying their bills, but emotionally detached from the situation. Our weekly calls became shorter and more superficial. 6 months passed. I heard nothing about boat tours or business loans. I assumed my intervention had worked, or perhaps Marcus had moved on to a new scheme. Either way, I was relieved. Then came the day that changed everything. The call from the insurance company was routine. They needed additional documentation for a claim related to Dad's ongoing cardiac care. Since I managed their finances, the representative contacted me directly. The required documents were in my parents' home office filing cabinet. I'll be visiting next weekend, I told the insurance rep. I can find the documents then. In truth, I hadn't planned a visit, but this gave me a reason to check in personally. Our phone conversations had been strained since the boat business confrontation, and I was concerned about Dad's health. I arrived Saturday morning to find Mom out at her garden club and Dad napping, his new normal since the heart attack. I headed to the home office to locate the insurance information, taking the opportunity to organize their chaotic filing system while I searched. The accordion folder labeled Insurance contained health policies, home insurance, and car insurance, but not the specific cardiac care documentation I needed. I moved to the filing cabinet, methodically working through each drawer. In the bottom drawer, behind folders of tax returns, I found a thick envelope labeled Last Will and Testament, Richard and Patricia Wilson, updated. The date stamped on it was just 3 months earlier. I shouldn't have opened it. It wasn't my business technically, but given my extensive involvement in their finances, I justified it as necessary due diligence. The legal language was standard until I reached the distribution of assets section. I read it once, twice, 3 times, unable to process what I was seeing. We bequeath our entire estate, including but not limited to our primary residence, at 147 Maple Street. All financial accounts, personal property vehicles, and any other assets owned at the time of our deaths to our son Marcus Alexander Wilson. There was a specific clause that followed. We have made this decision with careful consideration. Our son Louis James Wilson has achieved financial success and security through his own efforts. Marcus requires additional support to achieve stability and pursue his entrepreneurial goals. We believe this distribution best addresses the different needs of our children. Not a single item left to me, not the antique pocket watch that had belonged to my grandfather which Dad had promised me since childhood. Not Mom's collection of first edition books we used to read together when I was young. Nothing. More shocking than the complete exclusion was the justification. I was being disinherited because I had worked hard and made good choices. My success was being used to punish me, while Marcus was being rewarded for his chronic irresponsibility. I sat in the office chair, the papers trembling in my hands, as the full weight of the situation crashed down on me. All those years of financial support, the thousands of dollars every month, the emergency flights when Dad was ill, the countless hours spent organizing their finances and insurance, and in return a complete erasure from their legacy. I was still sitting there stunned when Dad appeared in the doorway. Louis, I thought I heard someone. His eyes fell to the papers in my hands and his expression shifted from confusion to discomfort. You shouldn't be going through private papers. Private papers. My voice sounded strange even to my own ears. I was looking for the insurance documentation, but I found this instead. Dad sighed heavily, lowering himself into the chair opposite me. We were going to tell you eventually. When after you were gone, I held up the will. You've completely cut me out. Everything to Marcus. Everything. It's not what you think he started. It's exactly what I think. It's right here in black and white. I pointed to the clause. Because I'm successful, I get nothing. Because he's a perpetual failure, he gets everything. What kind of lesson is that? Don't call your brother a failure, Dad said sharply. He's had challenges. Challenges. He's had every advantage. You've bailed him out of every consequence. And now this. My voice was rising despite my efforts to control it. I've been paying your mortgage for years. I pay your utilities, your property taxes. I covered Dad's medical bills when insurance wouldn't. And this is how you repay me. Mom appeared in the doorway, garden gloves still on her hands. What's all the shouting about? Dad gestured weakly to the papers in my hand. Louis found the will. Her face fell. Oh. Just that one syllable laden with guilt. Why, I asked, looking between them. Just tell me why. Mom removed her gloves, slowly buying time to formulate a response. Louis, you have to understand. You're already set up for life. You have your home, your investments, your high-paying job. So this is punishment for success. No, it's about need, Dad interjected. Marcus needs this security for his future, for his dreams. And what about my security? My dreams? Mom's expression hardened slightly. You've achieved your dreams, and no one forced you to help us financially. That was your choice." The words hit like a physical blow. My choice. When Dad got sick and couldn't work full-time, when the medical bills were piling up, when you were facing foreclosure, what choice did I have? "We would have managed," Dad said quietly. Managed how? By losing the house. By skipping Dad's medications. I stood up, needing to move to breathe. I stepped up because that's what family does. Because I love you. And this is what I get in return. "You're making this about money," Mom said, her voice taking on that disappointed tone she'd used throughout my childhood when I failed to live up to some unspoken expectation. "Material possessions shouldn't matter so much to you." "This isn't about money or possessions," I countered, my voice breaking slightly. "It's about what this represents. It's about being erased from your legacy while you're still happily accepting my financial support." "Perhaps we should discuss this when everyone's calmer," Dad suggested. "Where's Marcus right now?" I asked suddenly. "Is he at work? Does he even have a job currently? Is he contributing anything to this household?" Their silence was answer enough. "I need to go," I said, gathering my coat. "I can't be here right now." "Louis, don't leave like this," Mom pleaded. "What would you have me do? Stay and pretend this isn't happening, except that I mean nothing to you beyond my checkbook?" "That's not fair," Dad said. "No, it's not fair," I agreed. "None of this is fair." I walked out, got into my rental car, and drove straight to my hotel. I canceled my return flight and extended my stay, needing time to process. That night alone in my hotel room, I broke down completely. I cried for the first time in years, deep racking sobs that came from a place of absolute betrayal. I'd spent my entire life seeking approval that would never come, supporting people who saw me as nothing but a financial resource. After the emotional storm passed, I opened my laptop and wrote a long email to my parents. I detailed every sacrifice I'd made, every bill I'd paid, every emergency I'd handled. I explained that the will wasn't about money, but about what it symbolized. Their values, their love, their vision of family. The response came the next morning. A brief note from Mom. "We're sorry you're hurt. We never meant to make you feel undervalued. Perhaps we should all take some time to cool down before discussing this further. We love you, Louis." No acknowledgement of my points, no reconsideration of their decision, just a dismissal of my feelings as temporary emotional overreaction. Marcus texted later that day, "Mom and Dad are really upset. Why do you always have to make everything about you?" I checked out of the hotel and flew back to Seattle that afternoon, my mind racing with thoughts and emotions I couldn't begin to sort through. The betrayal cut deeper than I could have imagined, and for the first time I began to question everything about our family dynamic and my role in it. Something had to change. I just didn't know what or how, or if I had the strength to do it. Back in Seattle, I fell into a routine of work and solitude, avoiding my parents' calls and responding to texts with brief, non-committal replies. The monthly transfers for their bills continued automatically. I wasn't yet ready to make any drastic decisions. After 3 weeks of this emotional limbo, I finally reached out to a therapist, Dr. Samantha Reed, specialized in family dynamics, and had been recommended by a colleague who had gone through a difficult estrangement from his parents. In our first session, I laid out the whole story from childhood to the will discovery. Dr. Reed listened attentively, occasionally asking clarifying questions. When I finished, she was silent for a moment before speaking. "Louis, have you ever heard of the golden child and scapegoat dynamic in families?" I hadn't, but as she explained the concept, countless memories clicked into place like puzzle pieces, finally finding their proper position. The uneven expectations, the different standards of behavior, the constant justifications for Marcus's failures, and the minimizing of my successes. "This doesn't mean your parents don't love you, Doctor," Reed clarified, "but it does suggest an unhealthy pattern that's been established over decades, and your financial support has become an enabling mechanism in this dynamic." Over the following weeks, we delved deeper into these patterns. I began to see how my financial support wasn't actually helping anyone. It was maintaining a toxic status quo that kept my parents dependent and Marcus irresponsible. Concurrently, I consulted with my financial advisor, James, who had originally flagged the unsustainability of my support arrangement. From a purely financial perspective, you're compromising your own future security, he told me bluntly. Your parents made choices throughout their lives. So did your brother. So did you. Each of you deserves the outcomes of those choices, good or bad. But they're my parents, I argued weakly. Yes, and you've been more than generous. But there's a difference between helping and enabling. Right now, you're enabling patterns that harm everyone involved, including yourself. The conversations with both professionals led me to the same uncomfortable conclusion I needed to establish boundaries, including financial ones. This wasn't about revenge for the will. It was about breaking a destructive pattern and forcing everyone, myself included, to develop healthier relationships. I spent weeks drafting a letter to my parents. I rewrote it dozens of times, trying to strike the right balance between firmness and compassion. The final version was 8 pages long, detailing my love for them, my hurt over the will, and my realization that our current arrangement wasn't serving anyone well. I explained that I would be gradually withdrawing financial support over a 90-day period. I outlined a schedule. After 30 days, I would stop paying utilities. After 60 days, property taxes would become their responsibility. After 90 days, the mortgage payments would cease. I provided resources for financial counseling, suggestions for budgeting on their fixed income, and options for downsizing if necessary. I emphasized that this decision came from a place of love for them, for Marcus, and finally for myself. I sent the letter via certified mail to ensure delivery and followed up with an email containing the same information. Then I waited. The response was swift and predictable. Mom called first, cycling rapidly between guilt trips. After all we've done for you, minimizing. The will doesn't mean what you think it means, and panic. We can't possibly afford these bills. Dad's approach was more direct. This feels like punishment, Lewis. Is that what you're trying to do? Punish us for the will? I remained calm during these conversations, repeating the same points from my letter. This isn't punishment. It's a necessary restructuring of our relationship. You have options. You can ask Marcus to help. You can downsize. You can create a budget that works with your actual income. Marcus's reaction was the most volatile. He called late one night, clearly having had a few drinks. You're abandoning them, he slurred. What kind of son does that? They're old, Lewis. They need help. Yes, they do need help, I agreed. And you're welcome to provide it. You know I can't afford what you can. Then help within your means. That's all anyone can do. This is about the will, isn't it? You're so petty. I sighed. No, Marcus. The will was just what finally made me see the bigger picture. This is about creating healthy boundaries for all of us. He hung up on me. The first 30 days passed quickly. When the date arrived for utilities to become their responsibility, I received frantic calls from both parents. They hadn't made arrangements, assuming I would relent. I didn't. 3 days later, Mom called in tears. The electricity is off, Lewis. It's humiliating. The neighbors can see our house is dark. It was difficult to stay firm, but I managed. I gave you 30 days notice, Mom. Call the utility company. They'll work out a payment plan to turn it back on. We don't have the money right now. Then call Marcus, I suggested gently, or consider the options I outlined in my letter. She hung up and I sat in my living room feeling simultaneously terrible and liberated. The guilt was overwhelming, but beneath it was a sense that this necessary pain was the only way forward. Dad called the next day to inform me the utilities were back on. He didn't explain how they'd managed it, and I didn't ask. Our conversation was brief and strained. As the 60-day mark approached, the property tax bill came due. This time they were better prepared. They sold one of their cars, the newer one that they rarely used, and liquidated a small antique collection Dad had inherited from his uncle. The 90-day deadline for the mortgage loomed largest. I received increasingly desperate messages as it approached. We'll lose the house, Lewis. We're too old to qualify for a new mortgage. Where will we live? I maintained my position, though it cost me many sleepless nights. You have options. I outlined them in my letter. 2 weeks before the mortgage deadline, the most surprising call came from Marcus. I've been helping them look at apartments, he said, his voice uncharacteristically subdued. There's a senior living complex not far from their current place. It's small but nice, affordable. I was momentarily speechless. That's good of you, Marcus. Don't sound so shocked, he said, defensiveness creeping back in. They're my parents, too. I know. I'm glad you're helping. There was a long pause before he spoke again. I can't afford to take over all their expenses. I'm doing what I can, but it's not enough. Whatever you can do is valuable, I said, and meant it. It's not about the amount. It's about everyone contributing within their means. They're really scared, Louis. I know, I acknowledged. Change is scary, but sometimes it's necessary. The mortgage payment deadline came and went. The bank sent a notice of default. My parents put their house on the market, accepting an offer well below what it might have been worth with more time to sell. They moved into the senior apartment Marcus had found, downsizing dramatically from the 4-bedroom house to a 2-bedroom unit. Dad called to tell me they were settled, his voice carrying a mixture of resignation and relief. It's actually nice not having all that space to maintain, he admitted. And the monthly costs are something we can manage with our Social Security and my pension. I'm glad to hear that, Dad. Marcus has been helping with the moving and getting us set up. A pause. He's been sleeping on our couch 3 nights a week to help your mother adjust. I recognized the implied comparison, but chose not to engage with it. That's good of him. Throughout these months, I continued my therapy sessions. Dr. Reed helped me navigate the complex emotions, the guilt that threatened to drown me some days, the anger that flared unexpectedly, the grief for the family relationship I had always wanted but never truly had. Setting boundaries isn't the same as cutting ties, she reminded me. You're redefining the relationship, not ending it. And slowly, painfully, that's what was happening. Our family dynamic was being forcibly reconstructed like a broken bone that needs to be reset to heal properly. The process was agonizing for everyone, but underneath the pain, I could sense the possibility of something healthier emerging. 6 months after my decision to stop financial support, I was different. I was sleeping better. I had started dating again after years of focusing solely on work and family obligations. I had even begun volunteering at a financial literacy program for teenagers, using my experience to help young people avoid the patterns I had seen destroy my family's security. The relationship with my parents remained strained, but was evolving. We spoke every couple of weeks, our conversations careful but increasingly authentic. They never mentioned changing their will, and I never asked. That wasn't the point anymore. As for Marcus, our interactions were minimal but civil. He had surprisingly stepped up in ways I hadn't anticipated. He was providing more consistent emotional support to our parents, and had even taken a stable job at a friend's construction company to help contribute financially to their new living situation. It wasn't the family I had imagined or hoped for, but it was perhaps for the first time a family based on reality rather than dysfunction. And in that reality, I was finally finding a measure of peace. 1 year after I discovered the will, I returned to Boston for a visit, not to my parents' house, that had been sold months ago, but to their new apartment in the senior living complex. The visit was my idea, suggested during a phone call that had felt less tense than previous conversations. The complex was pleasant, clean, well-maintained, with community spaces where residents gathered for activities. Mom had joined a book club. Dad played chess twice weekly with a retired professor from Boston College. Their apartment was small but thoughtfully arranged with familiar furniture and photos, creating continuity with their previous life. Our reunion was awkward at first. Hesitant hugs, careful small talk, the weight of unresolved issues hovering in the background. But as the weekend progressed, something shifted. Perhaps it was the neutral territory away from the house that had been the setting for so much family drama. Perhaps it was the year of distance that had given everyone perspective. Over dinner the second night, Dad cleared his throat and addressed the elephant in the room. Louis, we've been doing a lot of thinking this past year. About family, about choices. He glanced at Mom, who nodded encouragingly. We didn't handle things well. The will, your support, any of it. We got comfortable with you taking care of everything, Mom added. It became expected rather than appreciated. That wasn't fair to you. I was stunned by this acknowledgement. Thank you for saying that. The truth is, Dad continued, we enabled Marcus for years. We thought we were helping him, but we were actually preventing him from growing up. The same way we let ourselves become dependent on you. Marcus seems to be doing better now, I offered. Mom nodded. He is. Having to step up has been good for him. He's more responsible, more consistent. He still has his dreams, but he's learning to work toward them rather than expecting them to just happen. And we're better too, Dad said. Living within our means. It's simpler, but there's less stress. There was a long pause before Mom reached across the table and took my hand. We're sorry, Louis. Truly sorry. For taking you for granted. For not seeing how our choices affected you. The apology I'd wanted for so long finally arrived, and surprisingly it didn't feel as momentous as I'd imagined. Perhaps because I'd already begun healing without it. Still, it was meaningful. I appreciate that I said sincerely. I'm sorry too for how abruptly I withdrew support. I could have handled it differently. You gave us plenty of notice, Dad countered. We just didn't want to face reality. We talked for hours that evening more honestly than we ever had before. They shared their fears about aging and dependency. I spoke about my resentment and my therapy journey. No one mentioned the will directly. That wound was still too fresh, but its presence was acknowledged in our broader discussion of family dynamics. The weekend visit didn't magically resolve everything, but it was a beginning, a foundation for something new and potentially healthier. In the months that followed, I reconnected with my father's sister, Aunt Elaine, who had experienced her own complicated relationship with my parents. She had distanced herself years ago after conflicts similar to mine, feeling unappreciated, taken for granted, held to different standards than her brother. It took me years to realize I couldn't change them, she told me during a visit to Seattle. I could only change how I responded to them. Her perspective was invaluable. She understood the family patterns from the inside but had the distance to see them clearly. The hardest lesson, she said, is learning that love doesn't mean sacrificing your well-being for people who won't do the same for you. My relationship with Marcus remained complicated. We spoke occasionally, mainly about our parents. There was less hostility between us, more of an uneasy truce. During one conversation, he surprised me with an admission. I was jealous of you growing up, he said. Everyone thought you had it easy because you were smart, but I saw how hard you worked, how nothing was ever good enough for them. And I was jealous of how effortlessly you won their approval, I countered. Not approval. Attention, he clarified. There's a difference. It was a moment of unexpected connection. A glimpse of the brother relationship we might have had without the toxic family dynamics that had pitted us against each other. 2 years after my financial separation from my parents, I received an unexpected envelope in the mail. Inside was a legal document, an amendment to their will. They had revised their estate plan to divide their modest remaining assets equally between Marcus and me. Attached was a note from Mom. This isn't about the money. It's about acknowledging that you are both our sons, both valued, both loved. The gesture meant more than they likely realized. Not because I needed or wanted their assets, but because it represented a fundamental shift in their thinking, a recognition of the imbalance that had defined our family for decades. My own life had transformed during these 2 years as well. The money that had previously gone to supporting my parents was now divided between additional investments and donations to financial literacy programs. I had been promoted at work, but had also established better boundaries around my time and energy. I had begun a serious relationship with someone who appreciated my reliability without exploiting it. Most importantly, I had learned to value myself beyond what I could provide for others, to recognize that love should not require constant sacrifice, and that healthy relationships involve mutual support, not one-sided giving. The journey wasn't complete. Family healing rarely is. There were still difficult conversations, moments of backsliding into old patterns, times when I questioned my decisions. But underneath it all was a foundation of self-respect that hadn't existed before. A certainty that I deserved to be valued for who I was, not just what I could provide. The last time I visited my parents, something remarkable happened. As I was preparing to leave for the airport, Dad pulled me aside. "I'm proud of you, Louis," he said quietly. "Not for your success or your money, for your integrity, for becoming the kind of man who stands up for himself while still having compassion for others." It was perhaps the first completely unconditional expression of approval I'd ever received from him, And while I was touched, I realized something important. I no longer needed it the way I once had. His approval was welcome, but not essential to my sense of self-worth. That more than anything else told me how far I'd come. So what did I learn from this entire experience? That family relationships are complicated. That love and dysfunction can exist simultaneously. That setting boundaries isn't selfish. It's necessary for genuine connection. That sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone is to stop protecting them from the consequences of their own choices. And most importantly, that it's never too late to rewrite the story of your family and your place within it. Have you ever had to set difficult boundaries with family members? Did it lead to positive changes in your relationships, or was the outcome different? Share your experiences in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might be struggling with similar family dynamics. Remember, recognizing unhealthy patterns is the first step toward breaking them. Thank you for listening to my story, and I hope it helps you navigate your own family challenges with strength and wisdom.